I work for Mulberry Technologies. If you haven't heard of me, you may have heard of them. We run the XSL list. You may know us from there. You may know us as part of the Secretariat for JATS. Okay, this is not quite the talk title that you'll find in your program, because after I started writing it, I realized I had my metaphors mashed slightly. So it is now BeWitched, BeWildered, and BeBothered, in honor of the classic song Bewitched, BeBothered, or the classic Bats, if you're a Pogo fan, Bewitched, BeBothered, and BeMildred. So my subtle bias for this talk, I'm a dockhead, okay? Text, 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 and text. My other not so subtle bias is that this is a very personal history. Other people who live through this might see it really differently. But when I say I am a dockhead and not a data person, what I mean is this is not my XML. Cash registers talk to gas pumps in XML, at least they do in the States. It's not that. It's not REST, it's not SOAP, it's not bank transactions, it's not digital cameras recording the headings. At the top, it's not state troopers recording your traffic warrants. All those things happen in XML, I know they do. I have the distinction of writing possibly the largest XSD schema ever written, which was written for terabytes of emissions data from smokestacks. Before we finished it, it had over 30,000 elements defined. And the only good thing you can say about it is nobody ever used it. Thank God. Oh. Okay, so what do I mean? I mean XML for things like this. Journal articles are my particular baby, also books, prose documents, scientific, technical, engineering, medical, legal, historical, dictionaries, drug monographs, text, okay? Maybe there's some data embedded in there somewhere, but not much. In short, what I'm talking about, is computers read this data, that's true, and that's the important thing. But people read it too, and it needs to be human readable. Now, I applaud Sharon on the last talk because she didn't do the next cliche I'm going to talk about. I have never been to a history of markup that didn't start with showing you an illuminated manuscript of some sort.
I purposely didn't do that.
Well, I did, because they all start with that. And my point is, I was a programmer, and that's not what markup meant to me at all. I was a programmer, and my friends were photo typesetters, and we know what markup was. It's computer markup. You put hooks into a manuscript so you can make it look pretty on paper, ink on paper. That's what we did. I wrote photo composition software for machines so large and so old, I can't find a picture of them on the web, which is why you have a generic cartoon. And we knew what markup looked like, too, okay? Here's what markup looked like. Machine readable, out-of-line markup, probably where something starts and ends, probably byte offsets. This is a mark record, for those of you who are not cognizant. It is a fine 1960s technology that libraries are still using. I would tell you why, but I've never understood it. That's what markup looked like. And here's the other thing that markup looked like. This is some IBM script from 1978, I think. RH on and RH off are the start and stop of a running head. These ampersands are actually variables of sorts. Page amper will end up being the page number. Section amper section will be the title of the section that started on the current page.
No, Debbie, that we have entities from exactly that.
Okay. That doesn't surprise me. I've forgotten how to read it in 30 years. Not at all. Asterisk means stay on the same line, and you can probably read the rest of it. Except Sharon's right. I probably have it wrong. But we'd heard talk about generic markup. And this was going to be internal markup, like the mark record, but specific to the publishing process. Procedural, no. Structural, yes. Data and vendor independence, we got all excited. We heard about this. This was going to be wonderful. We were going to have definitions. We were going to have models. Now, the Gen Code Committee and SGML even started before I got there, but the idea of generic markup wasn't all that new. Rocapi with Joe Gangemi at the head was using generic markup very nicely to make pretty pages. And I worked for a company that had a product called, and I may have to close my eyes to get the acronym right, System for the Automated Management of Text in a Hierarchical Arrangement. That is a generic markup language, proprietary generic markup language. What a bad idea. But it was a lot of fun. So along came the Gen Code Committee, and as I say, Sharon was one of the big kids when I was one of the little kids. And she was the chair of that committee. I begged and got to 3 or 4 of the meetings, all right? Now, the interesting thing is, as I understand the story, and this is my story, so don't correct, they got together initially to make up all the tags we'll need for publishing. And this is going to be 75 to 200 tags, maybe 300. Guys, we're up to 700. So they went meta and joined with the ISO folks and came up with, you know, standard generalized markup language. But the point is, it was meta. They weren't going to dictate to us what we could use. We could make up our own. This was not going to be imposed by IBM or anybody else. And I cannot tell you how exciting that was. Structural markup. I could actually say what something was. Non-procedural, embedded right in my data. I could circle something and say, this is a blap, okay? Which is really neat. We were allowed to make up our own tag sets. We had to. It was fantastic. And there was this database-like schema thing that was going to control what could go into the internal tagging of a document. Publishing programming problems were going to be solved. This was the way of the future, world peace, everything. And models could say a lot of things. There was no limit to the number of possible structures. If I wanted to define 30,000 structures, I could. If I'm brighter, I define around 65, maybe 200. But look at all the things markup could say, all right? Document structure. I am a footnote. I am a paragraph. I'm a list. I'm a table. This is exciting. Semantic content. Now, Sharon alluded to this earlier. This is not RDF and OWL and ontologies. There were lots of ontologies. I wrote a bunch of them. I worked on others. They were written for databases, okay? Documents didn't have ontologies. But what we had was the ability to say, ooh, if I speak the language in which this tag name is written, I can look inside the element and I'll know what it is. It's somebody's given names. It's a drug name. It's a country. It's a question and answer. It's a methodology section. That was exciting. You could put metadata, the bibliographic metadata, you could put it right in there with the record. Oh, we were jumping up and down. Navigation and links. Hey, I bought the whole X-Link thing. I built it into every DTD I've written since. A lot of good that did. But anyway, searching and discovery. You could build into a document the index terms. So you could do an automatic index, which had to work even if you took sections out, because the index terms were embedded right there in the document. And by the way, we had some presentation markup, the last one. Why is this word in italics? Well, if I know it's a genus and species name, I can call it a genus and species name. But if it's in italics, because that's what the person who wrote it in 1650 did, he's not around to be asked, and I'm just going to make it italics, okay? So you can get your line break, maybe, okay? All right. And we said, I'm going to have to make this one smaller. Okay. We said we could model anything, all right? One of my favorite model analogies early on, Pam Janusa, who many of you know, she ran the SGML XML conferences, she consulted in Europe forever. She used to say, I can model this table. A table is a top followed by a required repeatable number of legs. And somebody said, shouldn't that be like leg, 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 leg? Don't they have 4 legs? She said, no. It might have 3 legs, it might have 2 legs, it might be a pedestal table, it might have only 1 leg. So it's a leg with a tabletop with required, repeatable. All right, so we made models. It was exciting. We could model anything, just ask us. So let me go back up to, so this is from the SoftQuad. We mentioned some of their products, Author Editor and Panorama and other good things. This is a model of theirs. Okay, from the SGML primer, written by, I think, Yuri Rubinsky and Marie Maloney, but I don't know. Apologies, I really don't know. This is the public model for floods before God's promise to Noah. For those of you who are lucky enough not to dream in DTD syntax, and forgive me, but I do, water plus means water required repeatable. So what it takes to make a flood is water, 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 water. And here's a document constrained to that model, okay? Water is empty, flood, water, 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 water. We made models. And here's another model, which I very much like from that same document. This is, in Uri's words, when God promised that never again would a flood go on forever, and the document type definition had to be rewritten, HTML connectors appeared on the face of the earth. So again, for those of you who don't know DTD syntax, like your back of your hand, a flood requires water, repeatable. You've got to have water. You've got to have a rainbow. Without a rainbow, it's not a flood, okay? Now, this dove and goose stuff at the end, that's optional. You may not release it and get anything back. And what is water? The water model has become more complicated. We have rain and wind and lightning and thunder. Now, thunder always has to follow lightning. Lightning always has to precede thunder. You always have both. You never get lightning without thunder. And the rain and the wind can be mixed in there anywhere. We thank SoftQuad for those. I lost my copy of that book years ago, and somebody brought me one at the birthday party last year for HTML. So thank you.
It has never been presented with so much flair. So, making it so much fun.
It was fun. That's part of the point I'm trying to make. It was fun. Everybody made models. Now, this model comes from ISO 8879, the non-normative part of the spec. This was used, and I quote, I'm going to have to read some of this, illustrative to illustrate markup syntax and good design practice. Was it good design practice? Of course it was. It said so. Time makes ancient good uncouth. Okay, again, for those of you who aren't into this, these things are called occurrence indicators. And dash dash means you must have the start tag, you must have the end tag. Dash O means you must have the start tag, the end tag is allowed to be omissible. And OO meant you can leave off the start tag and the end tag, and the parser will infer where they go. It made parser writing really interesting. The other intriguing bit of this syntax you may not have seen before is this plus right here. These were called inclusions, and they may have been one of the worst markup ideas ever done. What this says is that IX, and oh God, what does IX stand for? I don't even remember.
Index.
No, yeah, it might. Okay, I'll take your word for it. It's index. And fig, or fig and footnote, are allowed anywhere inside this model, between the parentheses. That is to say, before front matter, inside front matter, between body and front matter, between body and appendix, you can put 4 figures. What do they mean there? Okay? But that's good design practice because it said so. So,
Charles said so.
yeah, well, there is that. Thank you, Charles Goldfarb. Yes.
Just as long as we give credit to the right person.
I think giving Charles credit for that is really appropriate. Sorry, but publishers led the way. This is the first, as far as I know, commercial. We're putting it out there hoping you will use it document model. This is the Association of American Publishers, the AAP model. They modeled serials and journal articles and books. And the first thing to notice is it's really important that you use short names because machines aren't very big. And this says that a serial is serial front matter followed by a serial body followed by optional serial back matter with all of these inclusions. I looked these up. Async is asynchronous object. Don't ask me what that means. ADV is even more fun. That means advertising. So advertising or figures or footnotes or tables can go anywhere in there, and then you find out what's inside front matter. This sort of makes sense. This is title, abbreviated title, alternate title, and rep, which is repeating identifier. They can nest. I don't quite understand it. And then you get serial pub front matter, and that's all this stuff, of which CRT is copyright notice, and that's as far as I got in looking it up. So this is the BeWitched of my title. I'm dividing the days of writing tag sets and models into 3 phases. the BeWitched phase, the giddy days of bespoke tag sets, the BeWildered phase. Your vendor gave you your tag set and you had to use it. And the BeBothered phase, which is now. We'll get into that. But this was BeWitched, the giddy days. Everybody needed a bespoke tag set. And everybody made document models, and hundreds, maybe thousands of them were written. Publishers did this, the Elsevier's and the John Wileys and the Macmillans and the Thomson Reuters. All the car manufacturers did it. All the aircraft manufacturers did it. Big people like Caterpillar did it. The US military went in for it in a big way. There were hundreds of these, and I know, I wrote a lot of them. But the thing that you need to remember about these days is that having a document model was news, okay? And at the GCA's SGML conferences, which were held in the United States and in Europe, Yuri Rubinski, the chair of that conference, would stand up and give a talk called State of SGML, at which all he did was read out, the Boeing made a new DTD, so-and-so made a new tag set. And there got to be so many of these that in Europe, Pam Janusa, and in the United States, Tommy Usden, got up to read them with him, and they'd alternate reading these things, and these readings went on for 15 to 20 minutes. It was news that people wrote tag sets.
Because it meant we had customers.
Yeah, well, I was a consultant, I agree with that. But the other weird thing I went back and discovered, until recently, when I shipped it all off to the University of Illinois archives, I had the proceedings of every SGML or XML conference on the planet. If I hadn't been there, I got somebody to steal me one. And in 1993, they said, oh, come to this conference. As a bonus, we will give you 15 free DTDs. They're in the back. Now, the really unusual thing, and it's so like GCA, is in fact there were only 13. And we called the process by which you produced a document model document analysis, right? We didn't have data, we had documents. This was document analysis. Now, Patrick DeRusso defines document analysis as modeling a text is the process of making explicit what is understood implicitly by most readers. Maybe. I used to run database design sessions, and it's exactly the same thing. If you know about JAD, Joint Application Development or Design, same thing. And you need to identify and name all the pieces and describe the relationships and describe the properties and figure out the links and add metadata, same thing. Anyway, this was the way Mulberry Technologies, my company, did it. The point of using stickies, there were many companies that did these things on computers and displayed them on the screen. But when you did that, everybody said, oh, it must be right, it came off the computer. When you put it on sticky notes on the board, when you fail for the fourth time to understand what the user said, they will march up and rip one of these away and say, it goes down here, darn it. Basically, the yellow ones are elements. The pink ones are the hierarchy continues here because you can't do one hierarchy forever. The greenish ones are attributes. You see the occurrence indicators plus whatever. We worked top down for a while. If you were going to rip this manuscript up into pieces, what would they be? And then we worked bottom up. What are the little things we need to do? Document analysis. And thus endeth the first era. About 10 years into the first era, that is to say 1996, SGML came out in 1986, although I was writing a parser for 2 years by then. Oh, by the way, that's something I forgot to tell you. That first commercial DTD, the AAP one, it came out before we had finished writing our parsers, those of us who were. So when the parsers came out, it was syntactically invalid. So things started going really, really fast. XML, which is the good parts version of SGML, in many people's opinion, came out of the W3C. XML took off for data. SGML was converted to XML, or you take your SGML system and you make XML as an output product. I wish that weren't still being done, but I was called to consult last month with someone who still has an SGML composition system because they paid $5 million for it whenever they did it, when that was real money, possibly. And they make XML and JSON as output products from their HTML. It was all happening so very, very fast. And models evolved too. Some of you will recognize this. I'm not going to scroll down and show you the whole thing. But these are the XSD data types, right? XSD took over from DTDs. And schemas made database-like constraints. Data types, largely ignored in my world. I think Norm Walsh said it best about DocBook. I have 365, 66 elements now, and maybe 3 of them, maybe 4, could benefit from typing. Well, he meant data types. Data typing, on the other hand, is incredibly powerful and underused. I think I'm glad, because it can lead to incredible complexity with incredible power. And you could be a little bit pregnant. We could do partial validation now. And that was totally exciting. But the purpose of the model was kind of forgotten. My company, Mulberry, well, no, I guess it was my previous company, the Atlas Consulting Group, was hired by some people who wanted us to write a schema to get rid of their editors. Write a model so tight that we won't need those damn editors and what they're doing to our prose. Make it completely foolproof. We quit, by the way. We didn't even try. But the quote, which I will read you, I won't be reading you most of the quotes, but I'll read you this one. Just because you can does not mean you should. Apparently I said that, and bunches of people quote me on it. I don't remember. I'm with Rick Jelliff. I don't remember. The other thing to remember is you can't make anything foolproof because fools are really, really, really ingenious. Now, there were still a lot of tag sets. Sharon went, are there still lots of tag sets? Yes, we're into the second BeWildered era, and there are gobs of tag sets. On the Cover, Oasis had something called the Cover pages, and on Robin Cover's pages, he listed the tag sets, okay? And here is a partial listing of, these went on for pages and pages and pages. I abstracted, I grabbed some I screen scraped for a talk I was giving in 2010, got 500, so I said, 500 will do. And they were lovely tag sets like EMELD, Electronic Metadata for Endangered Language Data. PARL-ML, a common vocabulary for parliamentary language. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? And Allure, one of my favorite, aggregation and logging of user requests. So why do I call this phase BeWildered? Well, I call it BeWildered because most folks knew they wanted XML, but they didn't know how, and their vendors told them how. Here's what you're going to be using, okay? Don't do analysis. Analysis went out of fashion. Don't figure out why or how, just do it. The airline magazine said it was a great idea, just do it. This was also a time of great myths. All data formats should be XML. XML is great for messages and transactions. God, don't you wish nobody had ever said that? Parsing isn't a problem. Why should we tie things to classes? XML is going to be everywhere. Remote procedure calls, B2B, EDI, everywhere. All authors are going to write in XML. Authors will fill out contributor and funding questionnaires willingly, truthfully, completely, and gladly. Yeah, right. Automatic QA will fix all our quality problems. And by the way, data will be self-describing. As he said, a paradigm a bit far. Okay, more of what got forgotten. And I think this has still been forgotten, although we are now in the next stage, is horses for courses. Human-readable data formats and machine-processable data formats do not have the same objectives and need not have the same goals or structure. What I'm trying to say in my subtle fashion is scholars ought not to have to read JSON, okay? I like JSON, don't get me wrong, but it's not for scholarly documents. I even have a mild haiku, okay? JSON is simple. Why do I not think so? I'm not a machine. Okay. Other things that got forgotten. Simple machine classing doesn't need the overkill of XML. It really doesn't. But the big thing that got forgotten, in my opinion, and this is a quote from me, failure to take over all known computing space does not constitute failure. XML didn't fail, people, not at what it's good for. All right, so what is it good for? One of the big theories of why do we do this stuff anyway is validation. XML as the gatekeeper, okay? Inside here, there be good documents. Outside there, we don't promise anything. Now, I've got to admit that the ability to reject bad documents is priceless. Right out of grad school, I had a job working for the government printing office of the United States, putting ink on paper. And as a phototype setter, you know, I'd write 3,000 or 4,000 lines of code that would put ink on paper. And then we'd run 100 documents through it, and then I'd add code to fix the mistakes that people made that the program had to win. We'd run another 1,000 documents through it, and eventually I had over 60,000 lines of code that still only had 4,000 that put ink on paper, and all the rest dealt with error conditions. So don't get me wrong, I like being able to say, this is bad, I'm not even going to try to handle it, send me a better one. But I'm not convinced that the grammar is the place to do that. So approximately 10 years later starts the third era, the now, BeBothered. So what's different about the now? Nobody writes bespoke models. Everybody ought to use one of the standard ones. You know what they are. You know which one is right for you. Don't do analysis, just you'll know. Don't subset, that's too much trouble. Don't superset, shoehorn. Now that said, there are still a lot of vocabularies out there, but only the little guys are writing new models. There's recipe ML, and if that's not small enough for you, there's beer ML, okay? Did you know that one existed? Okay? They exchange recipes and secrets for how to make beer. Yeah, I need to make point size bigger again, okay. So now big tag sets, at least in the publishing world, are all the rage. Now, we're not the only people who have big tag sets. The United States Department of Justice has things like NEAM, and it's monstrous, and it's thousands and thousands of modules, but it's also a completely metadata standard, all right? So in my world, here are the biggies, all right? ANSI NISO Z3996 2015, Journal Article Tag Suite. That is to say JATS, the one for which I am part of the Secretariat. And its cousin BITS. We had JATSCon this year, as we have every year for 10 years. And Jeff Beck, in his opening keynote, said, you know, JATS is 10 years old, and we're not one of the cool kids anymore. You know, we're just what you do if you have journals. And now there are 3 people in this room who are going to be laughing like loons because they don't use JATS. Elsevier doesn't, Wiley doesn't, and Macmillan, Springer, Nature, whatever you call yourselves, you guys in the back, you don't use it either. But they're about the only journal people in the entire world that don't use it, and all of them can convert to it. So everybody's using JATS. If you have TEI, well, TEI is just what you do if you have Eritrean manuscripts, right? And if you've got hardware, software, documentation, or reuse is important, you use DITA. And DocBook is what you do, well, maybe those people are all using DITA now. And my favorite, Bill Kasdorf is one of the big proponents of this, is all we need is HTML, okay? It spans and divs and class attributes all the way down, and that's complicated enough for our publishing. And if you believe that, we need to talk after this. So what's the difference between BeWitched, which was the giddy days of everybody writing all the models they wanted, and now? Well, one of the differences is in little things, tables. In the BeWitched days, everybody wrote a table model. AAP wrote their own, it was dreadful. US military CALs wrote one, and then wrote so many variants on it that they could not interchange between each other until OASIS fixed it with an OASIS CALs interchange model. SAS wrote one, possibly the best one ever made. Theirs was great. SoftQuad and other vendors let you map your tables tagged with things like product and total and color and size into table formats, so you didn't have to use table markup at all. Vendors wrote them, Exoterica wrote one, Arbortext wrote one. I personally have written 5 table models, and 3 of them were fairly bad, and I think 2 of them were significantly better than what we have now, but it's a little too bad, isn't it? Because here's what we have now. At least in my world, you use XHTML, or you use CALs, or you use both. And some of the tag sets allow you a simplified model if you have a really simplified table for what other people call an array. Okay, what else has changed? Document models were plug ugly, lots of them. Now DTDs look like this, period, the end. That's what they look like. I'm rather pleased about that. I used to talk about what a good format that would be to use. Schemas look like this, and relaxing looks like pretty much anything you want to. The other difference is that in the old days, tag sets were monolithic horrors. You could write 800,000 lines of code. I only saw it done twice. It was really bad. But 1,000 line DTDs were not at all unusual, and every bit as bad as that sounds. But our basic object orientation took over. We were programmers, after all, and everybody's modular these days, as well they should be. Other things that are different in these benighted times is that analysis has come back. Because if you're going to use one of those great big tag sets, you probably want to subset it. We heard about that just this week. We subset and superset JATs, and here's why. They did a nice job of it, too. You have to figure out what of it you're using. You have to figure out how to subset and superset it, and if you're using DITA, specialize. Now, that's sort of what these quotes say. Subsetting looks like too much trouble until it isn't. But I think my favorite quote is from Priscilla Walmsley, whom some of you know, who, by the way, denies saying this. NEAM is just useful components for choosing, okay? That's all it is. I thought that was nice. Separation of concerns is back. People are more and more realizing that you do not have to do this in the grammar layer, okay? Schematron has helped a lot with that, but business rules keeping separate. We've also come up with better ways to validate. Sparkle queries is validation. Yes, yes, yes. There are other ways to validate. Now, sadly, I've already used this joke in the panel, but I'm going to use it anyway, being bored. Then as now, the multi-use cliche still holds true. There is always a cheaper, faster, easier way to do any one thing than XML. But the minute you get more than that, you need a markup language, as Alex Malowski points out. If you've got data transfer, why aren't you in JSON? Oh, this is one of my favorites. I told you what we meant by semantics in the old days. You could look inside an element and see what it was, and that was semantic. Well, not anymore, it's not. People want linked data, people want RDF, people want OWL. I think my favorite that I've seen lately, pardon me, I'm going to have to read again, Swiss, the semantic web for interoperable specifications and standards, which you layer on top of your tag set, whatever it is, and it makes all those hypertext links. Snake oil salesman, you may run into him. Another big difference, however, in the now is who owns the model, okay? In the old days, document models were copyrighted. Not only that, they were frequently behind firewalls. These are secret, and they're my competitive advantage for you to even know that I'm using XML, and it's my secret. That was the BeWitched days, and then the BeWildered days was, yeah, well, my vendor has one, all my vendors have them, and they're all different. And BeBothered, things have really improved. I mean, you know, open source, CC BY, everything's on GitHub. I think it's wonderful. That's improved. So what are some of the lessons we've learned in our BeBothered, benighted days? Well, most of your validation and all your business rules can happen in a non-grammar layer. And use languages appropriately. What I mean by that is author in DTD and RNG or XSD as it goes into the database. Author in XNG, RND, whatever you want, schematron for QA. Garrett Mziki has been talking about something he calls epischemas, which layer a lightweight relaxing spec on top of an XSD, for example, to give you content completion. And DITA maps, of course, do it all. This is a good thing. So are we so over models? Well, not in my opinion. And I know that because somebody asked for my help the other day in writing a JSON schema. And I went, I can't even read JSON. You want a JSON schema? And then there's Shackle that is working on those same concepts for RDF. And I'm going, models are coming back in a wonderful big way. And I'll tell you why. What do we really use models for? Well, they're a contract between producers and consumers. So you can say, look, here's what I think I produced. And the consumer can say, well, here's what I expect you to have produced. And you can compare and see that you got what you wanted. Formal specification is really nice for consistent downstream processing. So maybe consistency is what we use them for. And of course, we use them for validation. But I think this is the big one. To share information, share your document model. What we use them for is communication. I'm running 5 minutes late. I knew I would. I apologize for that. But we are wrapping up. So where does this all come out? Well, BeWitched. Everybody had bespoke models and tag sets, and they wrote thousands of them. And it worked really, really well for processing and really, really badly for interchange, because my granularity is probably not your granularity. And there we are. BeWildered will let your vendor do it. That's great, except if you have 3 vendors, you probably then have 3 models. And it's a lot of work, and XML got a really bad time, and a bad rep in that middle period because, well, I've tried that XML stuff, and it was all different, and it didn't work. And now there's BeBothered, where at least in the text world, there are these few huge, big models, and it's actually working pretty well, too. So all 3 eras, it worked pretty well. Right now, there is an effort at NISO, NISO STS, which is applying JAT's journal article markup to ISO standards. And the sad thing is, it's working pretty well, too. And I've watched some of Bill Kasdorf's demonstrations, and sadly, HTML with spans and divs and classes all the way down can also be made to work pretty well. Now, way back when we started teaching this, and I hope I get a laugh out of Sharon for this one, because we would bring with us little luggage tags and tie them to things and say, that's what tags are. They're identifying elements. She doesn't remember. Oh, well. We did it for you. What can I say? And the people would say, well, this is only going to work if we all use the same tags. And later they said, well, why should we waste time on document analysis? We're just going to be arguing on what to call the definition list this time. And that was interesting. And what I'm wondering is the discipline of using structure more important than the tag set we use? Or is there another possibility? Take a look at these IBM GML, generic markup language, thanks again, Charles Goldfarb, from 1983.
No, he didn't do it. He used it.
All right. Anyway, he claimed he did it, but then again, I've heard lots of his claims, so I'm not surprised. But the point is, take a look at these tags. Some of them have start tags, some of them have end tags, some of them don't have end tags. Ask yourself, how many tag sets have you seen with paragraph, ordered list? How many tag sets, for those of you who write tag sets, have you built that had these in there by another name? Okay? So maybe, just maybe, here's another thing from the Gen Code 1983. I've really recently written BITS, which is the book interchange tag suite. And guess what our books look like, okay? They have front matter, they have body matter, they have rear matter. We don't call them chapters, we call them book parts, but hey, it's the same model, right? 1983 to now. So the question I leave you with is there a standard average document grammar? This is a play on the standard average European language. I first heard this articulated by Michael Spurberg McQueen, but Peter Flynn's giving a talk about it at Balayage this year. And this grammar includes things like nested sections, bibliographic metadata, restrictions on what you can do, linking to citations, things like that. So I leave you with that question. Is there a standard average document grammar that we've just been reinventing all these years with our own syntactic sugar that we need because ours is different on top? I don't have an answer. And I thank you.